For 60 long years, humanity sat quietly at the table of the Galactic Concord and said almost nothing. They smiled, they nodded, they signed trade agreements, and shook hands with species that had claws and tentacles and teeth the size of knives. They never raised their voice. They never threatened anyone. And because of this, every alien civilization in the known galaxy came to the same conclusion about the human race. They were soft, they were weak, and they were absolutely harmless. The Concord was a loose alliance of more than 40 spacefaring species. Some of them were ancient. Some of them had conquered entire star systems through blood and fire. The Draelith Dominion had burned whole planets to glass during their expansion wars. The Vor Collective had enslaved 6 species before anyone managed to push them back. These were civilizations built on strength, and they respected only one thing: the ability to destroy. Humanity had none of that. At least, that was what everyone believed. Earth's ambassador to the Concord was a tall, calm man named Nate Caldwell. He had held the position for nearly 15 years, and in all that time, he had never once lost his temper. When the Draelith ambassador called humans herd animals with clever hands, Nate smiled and offered him a glass of bourbon. When the Vor delegates spat on the floor during a trade negotiation and said Earth's colony worlds were ripe for harvesting, Nate thanked him for his honesty and changed the subject to agricultural exports. Behind his back, every species laughed at him. They laughed at all of humanity. In the hallways of the Concord station, alien diplomats made jokes about the human race, the way older children make jokes about the smallest kid in the yard. Humans are the galaxy's pets, they would say. Friendly, eager, and completely without teeth. He was a man who understood something that most alien species did not. That silence is not the same as weakness, and patience is not the same as surrender. Every insult he absorbed, every humiliation he smiled through, bought Earth another year. Another year to build, another year to prepare. Because deep in the cold black emptiness of the Oort cloud, far beyond the reach of any alien sensor network, humanity had been working. Not for years, for decades. Commander Lena Beckett knew this better than anyone alive. She was 52 years old, with short gray hair and steady hands and eyes that had spent 30 years staring at star charts and battle simulations. She commanded the deep space vessel Valor's Edge, one of the most advanced warships ever built by human hands, and she had never once fired its weapons in a real engagement. That fact burned inside her every single day. Lena had joined the United Earth Navy at 21. She had trained her entire adult life for a war that her superiors kept telling her would never come. She ran simulations. She drilled her crew until they could execute complex fleet maneuvers in their sleep. She studied every species in the Concord, their weapons, their tactics, their psychology, their fears. She built plans for wars against enemies that most humans on Earth didn't even think about. And she waited. The thing that no alien intelligence service had ever discovered, the thing that humanity had guarded more carefully than any secret in its history, was simple. Earth had not avoided war because it could not fight. Earth had avoided war because its leaders understood, with a deep and almost frightened certainty, what humanity would become the moment it started fighting. Humans were not peaceful by nature. They were peaceful by choice. And that choice was held together by nothing more than discipline, patience, and the quiet hope that it would never need to break. Then the Vor Collective broke it. It happened on a Tuesday, Earth Standard Time. The colony world of Ardenna 7 was a green and golden planet on the outer edge of human space. It was not a military outpost. It was not a strategic position. It was a farming world. 200,000 people living in small towns scattered across endless fields of wheat and barley and sunflowers. Families, children, old couples who had retired there because the sunsets reminded them of Kansas. The Vor fleet arrived without warning. 1,200 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and filled the sky above Ardenna 7 like a swarm of black insects. They did not issue demands. They did not negotiate. They simply opened fire. The first strikes hit the colony's small communication relay, cutting it off from Earth. Then, the bombardment began. Plasma rounds rained down on the fields and towns. Buildings collapsed. Fire spread through the wheat like a living thing, orange and furious and unstoppable. People ran, but there was nowhere to run to. The Vor landing parties came down in heavy dropships and moved through the burning settlements with weapons drawn, rounding up survivors, executing anyone who resisted. A 7-year-old boy named Ben Whitley hid under his bed while his house burned around him. A 31-year-old teacher named Maria Costas shielded her students with her own body and died from a plasma bolt that punched through the classroom wall. An old farmer named Owen Pratt stood on his porch with a hunting rifle and fired 3 shots at a Vor soldier before they cut him down. By the time it was over, 1,443 human beings were dead, and the Vor made sure the entire galaxy knew it. Admiral Zalvrek, the commander of the Vor fleet, had ordered every moment of the attack recorded and broadcast live on every open Concord frequency. He wanted the galaxy to see what happened to weak species. He wanted humanity to understand its place. He sat in his command chair, drank fermented nectar from a jeweled cup, and watched the footage of burning human towns with a satisfied grin on his wide, gray face. Then he sent a message directly to Earth. It was short. Kneel before the Vor Collective, or we will harvest your worlds one by one. You have 72 hours. The message reached Earth within minutes. It was played in the chambers of the United Earth Council. It was played in military command centers on 6 continents. It was played on the bridge of the Valor's Edge, where Commander Lena Beckett watched it with her hands folded behind her back and her jaw tight. She simply looked at her first officer and gave a single nod. Across human space, something woke up. Something that had been sleeping for 60 years. At the Concord Assembly, Ambassador Nate Caldwell requested an emergency session. Every species sent their representative. The chamber was packed. Alien diplomats whispered and chuckled, expecting the usual, a polite complaint, a request for mediation, maybe a tearful plea for help. Nate walked to the podium. He was not smiling. His face was still, and his eyes were dark, and there was something in his expression that made several of the alien ambassadors shift uncomfortably in their seats without quite knowing why. He looked out at the assembled faces of 40 alien civilizations. He let the silence stretch until it became heavy and strange. Then he spoke 5 words, and his voice was quiet and even and carried to every corner of that enormous chamber. You will regret this deeply. He turned and walked out. He did not look back. The chamber stayed silent for a long time after he left, and for the first time in 60 years, nobody laughed. Admiral Zalvrek was in a very good mood. His fleet of 1,200 warships held orbit above Ardenna 7, like a crown of iron and fire, and down below, the last fires of the human colony were still burning. The smoke rose from the wheat fields in thick gray columns that could be seen from space, and to the Admiral, it looked beautiful. It looked like victory. He sat in his command chamber aboard the Vor flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Crushing Tide, and he drank his 3rd cup of fermented nectar while his officers celebrated around him. They laughed and slapped each other on the back, and replayed their favorite moments from the attack footage. One officer had a particular clip he kept showing everyone, a human woman running across a field with a child in her arms, before a plasma round hit the ground beside her and threw them both into the dirt. The officers found it very funny. Zalvrek allowed himself a wide, satisfied smile. This was how the galaxy worked. The strong took what they wanted, and the weak either kneeled or burned. Humanity had spent 60 years pretending to be civilized, pretending that kindness and trade deals could replace the basic truth of power. Now they would learn. He expected Earth's surrender within a day, maybe 2. He had already begun drafting the terms in his head: full economic submission, military disarmament, and the handover of at least a dozen colony worlds to Vor control. His intelligence officers assured him there was nothing to fear. Human military records in the Concord archives were almost empty, Earth maintained a small defense fleet, perhaps 300 ships at most, none of them tested in real combat. The humans had no war experience, no battle doctrine, no allies willing to fight on their behalf. This would not even be a contest. 45 minutes passed after the broadcast of the attack. Then an hour. Then an hour and a half. Every sensor station in the Vor fleet scanned the surrounding space and found nothing. No human ships. No engine signatures. No communication signals. The space around Ardenna 7 was empty and silent and cold. Some of the Vor officers began to relax even further. "They are hiding," one of them said with a laugh. "Like rodents in a hole." Jolvrek nodded and poured himself another drink. Let them hide. Fear is the first step toward surrender. But not everyone in the galaxy was so relaxed. At a Concord observation post on the edge of the Ardenna system, a young human signals officer named Danny Marsh sat at his console and frowned. Danny was 26 years old, with messy brown hair, and the kind of face that still got called kid by older officers. He had been assigned to the Concord post as part of a joint observation program, and his job was to monitor deep space sensor data and file reports that nobody ever read. He was not supposed to be important. But, at that moment, he was the first person in the galaxy to notice something very strange. His instruments were not showing ships. They were showing something he had never seen before. Tiny distortions in the fabric of space itself. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. They appeared on his sensor screen like heat shimmer on a hot road, rippling and bending the starlight in ways that should not have been possible. They were everywhere. Above the Vor fleet, below it, behind it, in front of it, on every side. Danny's hands trembled as he ran the numbers. The distortions were not random. They were arranged in a perfect three-dimensional sphere around the entire Vor formation. Whatever was causing them was positioning itself with a precision that made his stomach drop. He opened a channel to the observation post's commander, a Drelith officer named Korvan, and said, "Sir, you need to see this right now." Korvan walked over, looked at the screen, and went very still. In 30 years of military service, he had never seen a fleet maneuver like this. He had never even imagined one. "What am I looking at?" he asked quietly. Danny swallowed. "I think the humans are here, sir." The distortions cleared all at once, like fog burning away in sunlight, and 2,800 human warships appeared in the space around the Vor fleet. They did not arrive in a loose formation. They did not arrive in a scattered wave. They arrived in a perfect, closed sphere, a cage of metal and weapons and cold intent that surrounded the 1,200 Vor ships on every axis. Above, below, port, starboard, fore, aft. There was no opening. There was nowhere to run. Every single Concord sensor station in the region lit up at the same moment. Analysts from a dozen species shot upright in their chairs. Communication channels across the galaxy exploded with chatter. The Drelith Military Command Center, 3 systems away, went to full alert. The observation post where Danny Marsh sat was suddenly the most important room in the galaxy, and the young officer could barely breathe as he watched his screen fill with more blue dots than he could count. The human fleet was not just large, it was impossibly, absurdly large. Where had they built these ships? Where had they hidden them? How had they crossed interstellar space without a single sensor detecting their approach? These questions raced through the minds of every military analyst in the Concord, and none of them had answers. Aboard the crushing tide, Admiral Jolvrek dropped his cup. The fermented nectar splashed across the deck in a dark puddle. But he did not notice. He was staring at his tactical display, where 1,200 green dots representing his fleet were now completely encircled by a wall of red. His officers had gone silent. The laughter was gone. The celebration was over. "How is this possible?" one of his captains whispered. Before Jolvrek could answer, his communication officer said, "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet." The main screen of the command chamber flickered, and the face of a human woman appeared. She had short gray hair and calm, steady eyes, and she sat in a command chair with her back straight and her hands resting on the armrests. She did not look angry. She did not look afraid. She looked like someone who had been expecting this moment for a very long time, and had already decided exactly how it would end. "This is Commander Lena Beckett of the United Earth Navy," she said. Her voice was flat and unhurried, almost bored, as if she were reading a weather report. "You have committed an act of war against a sovereign human world. You have killed 1,443 civilians, including children. Under the laws of the United Earth government, this act requires an immediate and total military response." She paused for exactly 1 second. "You have one chance. Power down your weapons, shut down your engines, and surrender unconditionally. You have 90 seconds to comply. This offer will not be repeated." The channel stayed open. The bridge of the crushing tide was dead silent. Every VOR officer stared at the screen, and for the first time, they saw something in a human face that they had never noticed before. Behind those calm, steady eyes, there was no bluff. There was only a simple, patient certainty that what was about to happen had already been decided. Admiral Zholvrek was many things, but he was not the kind of creature who surrendered. He had conquered worlds. He had crushed rebellions. He had never lost a battle, and he was not going to kneel before a species that the entire galaxy considered harmless. He straightened his back, bared his teeth in the VOR expression of defiance, and gave the order. "All ships, open fire. Destroy them." 1,200 VOR warships lit up their weapon systems and began firing into the surrounding wall of human vessels. On the bridge of the Valor's Edge, Lena Beckett watched the VOR plasma rounds streak outward toward her fleet. Her expression did not change. She did not flinch. She turned to her bridge crew, and her voice was quiet and clear. "Start the clock." The clock began at 0, and the galaxy held its breath. The VOR fired first. 1,200 warships unleashed everything they had. Plasma volleys, torpedo spreads, particle beams. All of it pouring outward in a furious wave of light and heat, directed at the surrounding wall of human vessels. It was the single largest opening salvo the VOR collective had ever launched. Enough firepower to crack a small moon. And for a brief, shining moment, Admiral Zholvrek felt something close to hope. Then the hope died. The human fleet did not scatter. It did not retreat. It did not even seem to notice. The 2,800 ships adjusted their positions by fractions of a degree, moving in small, precise shifts that looked almost lazy. And the VOR plasma rounds passed through empty space where human ships had been a half-second earlier. Torpedoes lost their targets and spiraled into the void. Particle beams hit nothing but starlight. The VOR had fired everything, and they had hit absolutely nothing. On the bridge of the Valor's Edge, a tactical officer named Chris Hadley looked up from his console and said, "VOR salvo complete. 0 impacts across the fleet." Commander Lena Beckett did not react. She had expected this. The human fleet was running on a system called Aegis, a networked battle intelligence that connected every single ship in the formation through a web of real-time data sharing. Aegis was not a simple computer. It was the product of 40 years of development by the most obsessive military engineers on Earth. And it did something that no alien fleet had ever achieved. It made 2,800 ships think as one mind. Every captain in the fleet still made their own decisions. They still commanded their own crews. But Aegis fed them information. Perfect, instant, constantly updated information about every enemy ship, every incoming projectile, every gap in the VOR formation, every weakness in their shield geometry. A human captain did not need to guess what was happening on the other side of the battlefield. Aegis told them. A human gunner did not need to estimate where a target would be in 3 seconds. Aegis calculated it down to the centimeter. The result was a level of coordination that the galaxy had never seen and could not understand. Lena gave the first real order of the battle. Begin Phase 1, Electronic Warfare, blind them. Across the human formation, specialized ships activated systems that the Vor had no name for and no defense against. Waves of electronic interference swept through the Vor fleet like an invisible storm, scrambling their sensors, corrupting their targeting data, and feeding false information directly into their fire control systems. Within seconds, every Vor warship was seeing ghosts, phantom human ships that did not exist, appearing on their screens in positions that were completely wrong. The Vor kept firing. They poured plasma into empty space, chasing targets that were not real, burning through their ammunition reserves at a staggering rate. Their gunners screamed at their consoles, unable to understand why nothing they hit was actually there. Their sensor officers cycled through every frequency they had, trying to find the real human fleet, and every frequency showed them something different and equally false. Captain Greg Horton, commanding the human destroyer Blackwood, watched the Vor fire blindly into the dark, and felt a cold, heavy weight settle in his chest. He had trained for this moment for 20 years. He had run this exact scenario in simulation more than 1,000 times. The Vor were flailing, burning, panicking, and there was something terrible about it. Not because it was hard, but because it was easy. He pushed the feeling down and focused on his work. Aegis highlighted his next target, a Vor heavy cruiser, whose shields were cycling at an irregular frequency, creating a brief gap every 4.2 seconds on the port side. Greg relayed the data to his weapons officer and said, "Precision shot. Engine core only. We disable. We do not destroy." The Blackwood fired a single round through the gap in the Vor cruiser's shields and hit the engine core exactly where Aegis said it would be. The cruiser went dark, drifting and powerless, its crew alive but trapped. This was happening everywhere. All across the battlefield, human ships were picking apart the Vor fleet with a calm, methodical patience that was almost surgical. They did not use overwhelming force. They did not carpet the area with fire. Every shot was aimed. Every target was chosen. And the goal was always the same: disable the ship, spare the crew. Captain Paula Dunn commanded the cruiser Iron Veil from the lower arc of the human sphere. She was a quiet woman with steady hands and a reputation for never wasting a single round. Her ship moved through the underbelly of the Vor formation like a needle through cloth, firing short, precise bursts that knocked out engine after engine after engine. In 1 hour, the Iron Veil disabled 31 enemy vessels without taking a single hit in return. The Vor could not adapt. Their fleet doctrine was built on aggression, overwhelming numbers, massive firepower, brute force charges designed to crush the enemy through sheer weight. They had never fought an opponent they could not see. They had never faced electronic warfare this advanced. And they had never, in their entire military history, encountered a fleet that moved with this kind of unity. By the 90-minute mark, over 400 Vor ships were drifting dead in space. Their engines were dark, their weapons were cold, their crews were alive, sealed inside their ships with emergency life support, unable to move or fight or communicate. It was at this point that the small, fast human frigates entered the battle. They were called Lancers, and they were the sharpest teeth in the human fleet. Each Lancer was barely a quarter the size of a standard Vor destroyer, but they were blindingly fast and almost impossible to track. They darted through the Vor formation in groups of 4, weaving between the larger ships with a reckless, dancing precision that made the Vor gunners dizzy. Lieutenant Commander Vicki Nolan led Lancer Squadron 7. She was 34 years old, with dark red hair tied back in a tight knot, and a grin that her crew said could mean either this is going to be fun or this is going to be terrifying, and sometimes both. Her squadron of 4 frigates slid into the heart of the Vor fleet like a knife between ribs. Vicky's approach was simple and brutal. Her Lancers would identify a cluster of Vor ships, accelerate to attack speed, pass through the cluster in under 6 seconds, and deploy precision charges against their engine cores as they flew past. By the time the Vor ships realized they had been hit, the Lancers were already gone, looping around for another pass. In 20 minutes, Vicky's squadron disabled 14 Vor destroyers. They lost 0 ships. They did not take a single hit. On the open Concord channels, the chatter from alien analysts had changed. The laughter was gone. What replaced them was a stunned, breathless silence, broken only by technical observations delivered in shaking voices. A Drelith analyst said, "They are not fighting. They are performing." A sensor technician from the Koroth hegemony said, "I have never seen a fleet move like this. It is not natural. It is like watching water flow downhill. There is no wasted motion. None." At the Concord observation post, Danny Marsh sat at his console and watched the blue dots of the human fleet dance around the green dots of the Vor. His hands were trembling, and there were tears on his cheeks, and he was not sure if they were from fear or from something else entirely, a strange, fierce pride that he had not expected to feel. By the end of the 3rd hour, the numbers told a story that the Vor could no longer deny. Over 800 of their ships were disabled and drifting. Their ammunition reserves were nearly spent. Their sensors were useless. Their formation had collapsed into a loose, chaotic cluster of panicking vessels, bumping into each other and firing at shadows. The remaining 400 Vor ships tried to run. Their captains turned their vessels toward the outer edge of the human sphere and pushed their engines to full power, desperate to find a gap, an opening, any way out. There was no gap. The human sphere had closed completely. 2,800 ships formed an unbroken wall of metal and light, and the 400 surviving Vor warships slammed to a halt in the center of it, surrounded on every side, with nowhere left to go. On the bridge of the Valor's Edge, Lena Beckett checked the clock. 3 hours and 12 minutes. She looked at the tactical display, where 400 terrified enemy ships sat motionless in the middle of her fleet, and she let out a slow, quiet breath. "Hold fire," she said. "All ships, hold fire. Let them sit." The human fleet went silent, and the battlefield went still, and the only sound in the void was the faint hum of engines and the desperate, frantic breathing of Vor officers who were beginning to understand what had just happened to them. The galaxy had never been so quiet. On 100 worlds across 1,000 light-years, members of every spacefaring civilization sat in front of their screens and watched the live feed from the Ardenna system. Military officers stood frozen at their consoles. Diplomats gripped the arms of their chairs. Intelligence analysts replayed the footage at half speed, then quarter speed, then frame by frame, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. None of them could. In the Drelith Dominion's central war room, a vast underground chamber, carved from black stone beneath their capital city, the highest-ranking officers of the most feared military in the galaxy sat in complete silence. The High Commander, a scarred old warrior named Toron, who had personally led 3 interstellar conquest campaigns and had never once retreated from battle, stared at the main tactical display for a very long time. The display showed the aftermath in perfect detail. 800 Vor ships drifting dead in space, 400 more trapped at the center of the human formation, and not a single human vessel destroyed. Not one. Toron stood up slowly. Every officer in the room turned to look at him. He was not a creature given to emotion, but the scales along his jaw were trembling slightly, which among the Drelith was a sign of deep disturbance. "We have been fools," he said. His voice was hoarse and quiet. "Every one of us. For 60 years we laughed at them. We called them pets. We are fools." He turned and walked out of the war room without another word, and the officers he left behind did not speak for a long time after. In the Korath Hegemony's intelligence headquarters, a senior analyst named Drenna pulled up every file the Hegemony had ever collected on human military capability. The files were thin, embarrassingly thin. A few outdated estimates of fleet size, some intercepted training communications that had been dismissed as routine, A single report from a field agent who had tried to penetrate human space 12 years ago and had simply vanished without a trace. The report had been filed as a probable accident. Drenna read it again now with fresh eyes. It felt a cold wave of understanding wash over her. The agent had not had an accident. The agent had been found, and the humans had not even bothered to make it look like anything else. They had simply erased him. She closed the file and put her head in her hands. Back in the Ardennes system, the 400 surviving Vor warships sat motionless in the center of the human sphere. They were not being fired upon. They were not being hailed. They were simply being watched, surrounded by 2,800 silent, motionless human ships that floated in the darkness like patient wolves around a trapped herd. This was the part that frightened the galaxy the most. Not the speed of the human victory. Not the precision of their weapons. Not the impossible coordination of their fleet. What frightened them was this. The humans had stopped. They had their enemy completely at their mercy, and they had chosen to do nothing. They were waiting. Admiral Zholvrek stood on the bridge of the crushing tide and tried to hold himself together. His hands were shaking. His officers would not meet his eyes. The tactical display showed red on every side, human warships above, below, left, right, forward, and behind. The sphere was closed. There was no escape route. There was no clever maneuver that could save them. His fleet was trapped as completely as an insect in a jar. He tried to rally his captains. He opened a fleet-wide channel and spoke in the hard, commanding voice that had carried him through dozens of battles. Warriors of the Vor Collective, hold your courage. We are the conquerors of 6 worlds. We do not cower before soft-skinned primates. Charge the Northern Arc. Concentrate all firepower on a single point and break through. The response was silence. Then, one by one, his captains began to speak, and what they said broke him. Admiral, my weapons are nearly dry. I have enough charge for perhaps 3 volleys. Admiral, my sensors are still scrambled. I cannot target anything. Admiral, half my crew are injured from impacts during the evasive maneuvers. My medical bay is full. And then a younger captain, barely old enough for command, said in a cracking voice, Admiral, they are not firing at us. They could destroy us at any moment, and they are choosing not to. What does that mean? What are they waiting for? Zholvrek had no answer. On open Concord frequencies, intercepted Vor communications were being broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. Analysts heard the voices of Vor officers arguing, pleading, some of them weeping. The same species that had laughed while bombing human farmland was now crying in the dark, surrounded by the consequences of what they had done. Several Vor ships began powering down voluntarily. Their captains did not ask for permission. They simply shut off their engines, shut off their weapons, and sent a quiet signal of surrender on the open channel. One by one, green dots on the tactical displays turned gray as Vor vessels gave up. Aboard the Valor's Edge, the bridge crew watched this happen in real time. The tension on the bridge was strange. It was not the tension of a fight, but the tension of watching something profound unfold, and knowing that every second of it was being recorded by the entire galaxy. Ensign Katie Pratt, 23 years old and fresh from the academy, stood at her station near the back of the bridge and watched a cluster of Vor ships go dark on the display. She leaned toward the officer beside her, a young man named Sam Everett, and whispered, Are we really not going to finish them off? She had not meant for anyone else to hear, but the bridge was very quiet, and her voice carried. Lena Beckett heard her. The commander did not turn from the view screen. She did not raise her voice. She simply answered, and her words settled over the bridge like something heavy and permanent. That is the point, Ensign. Any species in this galaxy can destroy an enemy fleet. That is not difficult. That is not special. What we are doing right now is something that none of them have ever seen. We are proving that we can win completely and totally, and then choose to stop. We are giving them their lives back, and they will remember that. Every species watching this will remember that. Not because we were merciful, but because we were strong enough to be. She looked at the view screen, where 400 enemy warships drifted in silence, and she understood. At 3 hours and 48 minutes, Admiral Zholvrek opened the communication channel to the Valor's Edge. His face appeared on the main screen. He looked old. The arrogance was gone. The pride was gone. His gray skin was pale, and his eyes, which had gleamed with satisfaction just hours ago while watching human colonies burn, were hollow and empty. He spoke in a voice that was barely a whisper. "This is Admiral Zholvrek of the Vor Collective. I surrender. Unconditionally. All ships stand down." Lena Beckett looked at his face on the screen for a long moment. She studied him. This creature, who had ordered the death of 1,443 civilians, who had laughed at the footage of burning children, who had told humanity to kneel. She studied him, and she felt the anger that she had held inside for hours, pressing against her ribs, like something alive and sharp and hungry. She let it pass. She let it go. She had a job to do, and that job was bigger than anger. "Your surrender is accepted, Admiral," she said. Her voice was even and professional. "Your crews will remain aboard their vessels. Human medical teams will be dispatched to all ships requiring emergency assistance. Any hostile action against our personnel will be met with immediate and final response. Do you understand?" Zholvrek nodded slowly. "I understand." The channel closed. Lena Beckett turned to her crew and said, "Launch medical ships, all of them. I want human doctors on every Vor vessel that has wounded within the hour." And so the galaxy watched something it had never seen before. Human ships, warships, vessels built to kill, opened their bays and launched dozens of medical transports. Emergency supplies. They flew directly to the crippled Vor fleet and began docking with enemy ships. Human medics walked into Vor vessels that still smelled of smoke and fear, and they began treating wounded Vor soldiers. The same species that the Vor had tried to conquer was now saving Vor lives. At the Concord observation post, Danny Marsh watched the medical ships deploy and finally let himself breathe. Beside him, the Dreolith officer Korvan stared at the screen and said very quietly, "What kind of species does this?" Danny thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "The battle was over. The guns were silent. The Vor fleet drifted in a field of broken metal and flickering emergency lights, and between the wreckage, human medical transports moved slowly from ship to ship, like white birds crossing a gray sea. Doctors carried supplies through airlocks into vessels that had been built to conquer them. Nurses treated wounds on soldiers who just hours ago had burned human homes to the ground. No one on the human side complained. No one hesitated. They had their orders, and their orders were to save lives. But Commander Lena Beckett was not finished. She sat in her command chair on the bridge of the Valor's Edge and stared at the view screen for a long time. The clock on the wall read 4 hours and 6 minutes since the start of the engagement. Around her, the bridge crew worked quietly, managing fleet operations, coordinating the medical response, processing the Vor surrender. Everything was running smoothly. Everything was under control. But Lena's face was still, and her eyes were distant, and her crew knew her well enough to understand that she was thinking about something beyond tactics and logistics. She was thinking about names. She reached into the breast pocket of her uniform and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was real paper, not a screen, not a datapad. She had printed it herself hours ago when the first reports from Ardina 7 had reached the fleet. She unfolded it carefully and looked at the list. It was long. It filled both sides of the page in small, neat type. 1,443 names. Every human who had died on Ardina 7. She turned to her communications officer, a steady-handed woman named Lisa Cole, and said, "Open a channel. Broadband. Every Concord frequency. Every open relay. I want every species in this galaxy to hear what I am about to say." Lisa's fingers moved across her console. "You are broadcasting to the entire Concord network." Lena Beckett stood up from her chair. She held the piece of paper in both hands, and she began to read. "Ben Whitley, age 7. Her voice was calm and clear. She did not rush. She did not add commentary. She simply said the name, said the age, and paused for a moment to let it settle. Then she moved to the next one. Maria Costas, age 31. Owen Pratt, age 64. Sophie Klein, age 12. Ray Donahue, age 45. She read each name the same way, with weight, with care, with the kind of attention that said this person was real, this person mattered, this person had a morning routine, and a favorite song, and someone who loved them. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She stood on the bridge of a warship, surrounded by the wreckage of a defeated fleet. And she gave every single one of those 1,443 people the only thing she could still give them: their name, spoken aloud, heard by the entire galaxy. Across the Concorde, the effect was devastating. In the Drelith war room, officers who had spent their entire lives studying battle tactics sat in silence and listened to a human woman read the names of foreigners and teachers and children. Toron, the High Commander, returned to the room at some point during the reading. He did not sit down. He stood at the back with his arms folded and listened to every name, and the scales along his jaw never stopped trembling. In the Koroth Intelligence Headquarters, Drenna the analyst listened with her eyes closed. She thought about the field agent who had disappeared in human space 12 years ago. She thought about how easily the Korath had dismissed his death, how quickly they had filed it away and forgotten. She wondered if the humans had a name for him too, written down somewhere, given the same weight. At the Concorde Assembly, alien ambassadors sat in the Great Chamber and listened to the broadcast on the overhead speakers. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The room that had laughed at humanity for 60 years was now completely still, and the only sound was the voice of Lena Beckett reading name after name after name. Some of the ambassadors had tears in their eyes. Others did not have tear ducts, but their species had their own signs of grief: trembling limbs, color changes in their skin, low sounds in the backs of their throats. The grief was universal. The names were human, but the pain was something every species understood. It took almost an entire hour. Lena read every single name without stopping. When she reached the last one, Jimmy Pace, age 4. She paused. She folded the piece of paper and put it back in her pocket. She looked directly at the camera that was broadcasting her image to the galaxy, and she spoke. "We did not want this war. We spent 60 years proving that. We came to the Concorde with open hands. We built hospitals on worlds that were not ours. We taught children who were not our species. We traded fairly. We asked for nothing but respect, and we were given none." She paused, and her voice did not waver. "Understand this. Every name I just read had a family, a home, a life that was taken for no reason other than cruelty. Humanity does not start wars. We have never started a war, and we never will. But when we are forced into one, we will end it so completely and so quickly that the memory of it will burn in your records for 1,000 years. Not because we enjoy it, because we need you to understand that the cost of attacking us is higher than any species can afford to pay." She let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. "We are going home now. Do not make us come back." The channel closed, the broadcast ended, and across the galaxy, a very old and very deep assumption about the human race shattered like glass on stone. Ambassador Nate Caldwell returned to the Concorde Assembly the following day. He walked into the chamber wearing the same dark suit he always wore, carrying a single document under his arm. The room was full. Every species had sent their senior representative. The seats that were usually empty during human speeches were packed. The hallways outside were crowded with aides and analysts and military attachés who had come to see the human ambassadors speak. Nate walked to the podium and looked out at the assembled faces. He did not smile. He did not need to. The room was already his, and everyone in it knew it. He placed the document on the podium and said, "This is a proposed treaty. It calls for binding protections for all civilian populations across Concord space. It establishes a joint peacekeeping force with real authority to enforce those protections. And it requires that this force be led for the first time by humans." He looked around the chamber. "I am not asking for your approval. I am asking for your signatures. You have seen what happens when civilians are not protected. You have seen what we do about it. I would prefer that none of us ever have to see it again." He stepped back from the podium and waited. The Drelith ambassador was the first to sign. He walked to the podium, pressed his claw mark into the document, and returned to his seat without speaking. The Korath representative signed next. Then, the delegates from the Pashan League, the Venthiri Republic, the Sulan Accord, one after another, species after species, until every member of the Concord had placed their mark on the page. The entire process took less than a week. In the months that followed, the galaxy changed in ways that were both visible and invisible. The Vor Collective was dismantled. Their conquered worlds were given independence. Admiral Jolvrek was tried for war crimes by a Concord tribunal and sentenced to spend the rest of his life on a prison station at the edge of known space. He went quietly. The fight had gone out of him on the bridge of the crushing tide, and it never came back. Humanity took its place at the head of the peacekeeping force and did what it had always done. It built things. Medical stations, communication networks, refugee processing centers, training academies where officers from every species learned a new way of thinking about conflict, taught by human instructors who spoke softly and carried very, very big sticks. The galaxy did not love humanity. That would come later, maybe, in time. But the galaxy respected them, and more importantly, the galaxy understood them. Humans were not soft. They were not harmless. They were not pets. They were a species that had looked at the full range of what they were capable of. The violence, the fury, the terrible and beautiful ability to destroy. And they had chosen, deliberately and with open eyes, to be kind instead. And that choice, the galaxy now understood, was not weakness. It was the greatest strength any species could possess. On Ardana 7, the wheat fields grew back, the towns were rebuilt, new families moved in alongside the survivors, and within a few years, the colony looked almost the same as it had before the attack. Almost. At the center of the largest town, a memorial stood in a small park surrounded by golden wheat. It was a simple wall of dark stone, and carved into it were 1,443 names. At the base of the wall, a small plaque read, "We came in peace, we answered in thunder, we returned to peace. Let this be the lesson." Commander Lena Beckett visited the memorial once, 3 years after the battle. She came alone, in civilian clothes, without telling anyone. She stood before the wall of names, and read each one silently, the way she had read them aloud to the galaxy. When she reached the last name, Jimmy Pace, age 4, she placed her hand flat against the stone and held it there for a long time. She did not cry. She simply stood there. A woman who had ended a war in less time than it took to watch a long movie. And she let the weight of it rest on her shoulders the way she always had. Quietly, completely, and without complaint. Then she turned and walked back through the wheat fields toward the setting sun. And the golden light stretched her shadow out, long and thin behind her. And the wind moved through the grain like a whisper. And the names on the wall watched her go in silence. The galaxy never tested humanity again.